Hi, everyone, and welcome. Glad to have you here. I'm Reverend Colleen Dara, and I'm the Internal Communications Coordinator for Metropolitan Community Churches, and I'm happy to be able to help coordinate us talking to each other about this important topic of caring for one another. So thanks for being here. Our apologies that the link was wrong. I'm glad you found your way. We're monitoring to see if anybody else is looking for any help to get into the room and make sure that they get here. So really glad that you're here. We're living in this, as I say, VUCA world. Maybe you've heard that term before, VUCA, V-U-C-A, that it's a volatile, unpredictable, complex, ambiguous world. And in the midst of that, we are doing caring for one another. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on with that. So I'm glad that we've got some experts here to help us have conversation. And as we dig into it, I'm just going to remind you, some of you are very familiar with this format, but we'll put questions to our panelists over on the far left-hand side in the questions box, and we can continue to have dialogue with each other and make comments in the comments only section. And that'll help us sort those things out. I appreciate you doing that with us. So let me introduce our guests today, and I think we've got a slide that gives you their information so that you can all see that as well. And here they are. So I would introduce to you, actually, as I'm looking at the screen on the far left-hand side is Reverend Maxwell Ray. And you see there, Maxwell's from Scotland and is a chaplain with the National Health Service there. So thanks for being here. And then we have next to Maxwell is Reverend Elder Dianne Fischer, Senior Pastor. And I can never pronounce this, Dianne. You're going to have to help me pronounce the name of your church.
MCC Rehoboth,
Rehoboth.
Delaware.
Rehoboth. Thank you. I'm always afraid I'm going to butcher it, and then I do. that's my stumble there. And then we have Dr. Carla Sherrill, who is with us, and who's an assistant professor of clinical mental health and somatic counseling, psychotherapy, and we're so glad to have you here with us. So welcome to the panelists. Welcome to all of you who are here to participate in this conversation tonight about caring for one another. I'm going to ask each of our panelists if they will introduce themselves, tell us a little about themselves and what they bring to this conversation tonight, this rapidly changing environment that we have in which we do provide care. So what is it that they uniquely bring tonight? So Carla, tell us a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself a bit more to the folks.
Always good to be with MCC folks. I'm actually in formation, moving toward ministry in MCC. So this is always good. As you said, I'm an assistant professor at Naropa University, which is a small liberal arts school, but it has a graduate school of counseling and psychology. And one of the things that is unique about the program, well, there are two. One is the school has a Buddhist lineage, even though it is non-sectarian. And it also, the program I'm in also has a focus on somatic counseling. So it really is paying attention to body and mind rather than separating the two. And at this time around grief and loss and all the things you just described, it ends up being important content, an important process to work with as we think about how we manage grief and how we're resilient in these times that are so difficult. So coming from that perspective, glad to be here and talk about this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump over to Maxwell and have you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you bring to this conversation.
Thank you. It's great to be part of this webinar tonight, and I suppose I don't really consider myself to be an expert by any means, but because I kind of believe we have a collective wisdom. But I have been a hospital chaplain for 13 years, working in mental health and in acute care. And my current post is working in a large acute hospital, 900 beds, 5,000 staff. It's the second biggest hospital in Scotland. I've been clergy with MCC since 1993 and have worked in local church ministry in local congregations, as well as currently I'm serving as part of the CDT team looking after clergy in Europe. Um, I came I came into MCC in 1989 when HIV and AIDS was starting to have a huge impact on our congregations. And I kind of currently find myself reflecting back on the learning from then and thinking about that today as we work together.
Thank you. Yes, and let's talk some more about that aspect of things too. So, Reverend Elder Dianne Fischer.
Hello, I'm the pastor of the third and the governing board member. I sort of come to this with a background of being a pastor and what I've been doing in my local church. And I would share with Maxwell, I think it happened early 90s and late 80s. And so I think that really influences a lot of what happened. Also, 9/11, what it was like, not being able to be present when I was. How do you deal with that? So those kinds of things. And I think that for pastors, we have a way of doing things. That's what I'm going to be talking about.
And Dianne, we're having a little hard time hearing you. So we're going to ask maybe if you could lean a little closer. Just say a few more words. Let's see if we can get you a little bit clearer. If not, Mike will chat with you.
Is that better? Okay. So I told him this might happen, and if it does keep on happening, I'll just take the headset off. It's questionably good. So just let me know. Put it in the box.
Okay, so I'm going to invite you to repeat your intro because it was very difficult to hear you.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Hi. I'm Dianne, and I'm the pastor of Rehoboth and a governing board member. I've been with MCC for just a little bit longer than Maxwell, and only a year, or licensed a year longer than Maxwell. So I've been doing this for a bit of time. The part that I really bring to it is part of being in a congregation and responding during a time of crisis to with the congregation, in particular when you're used to doing things in a certain way, and in a heartbeat, everything changes. And what happens to the congregation and you, and how do you work your way through that? Also, how do you deal with the losses? So that's what I'll be talking about. I hope you can hear me better.
Yeah, I'm going to direct you to talk with Mike on the side while we move ahead as you deal with your microphone question. But thanks again for all being here. And we all do bring our experiences, and the people that are attending this, you bring experiences as well, and we're wanting to hear from you in the comment section, as well as hearing your questions to our panelists so we can have this conversation together. I'm just aware that with all this rapid change that we've all experienced lots of loss, and so we're caring for people that are having loss, and we're having loss as well. And some of us have experienced this loss or people we're caring for may have lost jobs, they may have lost income, they've lost their sense of routine, lost connection with people, just going through a lot. So kind of aware of that, of the layers, the many layers that we're experiencing. I'm wondering, Carla, if you would talk with us a little bit about compound grief and share with us a little bit more about that impact on the people we're caring for, and then ourselves as caregivers too.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the other things that I do in the world is focus a lot on justice and focus a lot on these differences that we hold and similarities we hold with regard to groupness, sometimes called social groups, sociocultural locations. So I want to say that it's important for me to say that the things I'm going to talk about for a few minutes are also in the context of these differences uh, that we hold in the bodies we have and the families we come from and the social groups we come from and cultures we come from and how those influence how we grieve and how we understand loss. And I'll say that more than once because it feels so important that all of those are so important. So when I started thinking about this, I actually thought of many of the things that you said, Colleen, the things about what are the losses, and the losses from death or transition of family members and friends that are both unpredictable and some weeks so far have been pretty stunning in terms of the consistency, the numbers of times that has happened, and even if it had been one individual, that has certainly been so impactful. The other thing is this business of touch. And I started thinking a lot of the word intimacy and what has happened around intimacy, around touch, and around just spending time together, being in rooms with people and being able to feel the heat from somebody else's body as you go by them. And then time and space, a lot of stuff around time zones and where does my body think I am and where am I really? And what is that around loss and change? And then things around, you mentioned routine. I also thought about whatever I understood or we understood security to be, whatever safety was, whatever privacy was, whatever my relationship to myself and my others has been, independence and interdependence, that all of those have been impacted by this. And then some assumptions about health, one's own health and health of loved ones and others who we know. And then, of course, spiritual context, religious context, what is ritual? In this context has been something that's been I've been thinking about a lot. And then employment and finances and housing and education and governmental structures in terms of policies and practices and procedures and how those have changed. What's happening to law day by day that impacts people. And I'm thinking about folks around immigration status and the unhoused. Folks that at times get forgotten, depending on where we are. I thought about entertainment, and suddenly that doesn't sound as frivolous as it did at one time around those things. And then identity, again, was my relationship to myself. How does culture impact that? My relationship to family and friends and others and how that's been impacted. And ultimately, what's my relationship to God in this? What's my relationship to God and the ancestors? How has that been impacted by that? So the other thing that I've thought a lot about is transition, and it got mentioned here, Dianne, when you were talking about fast turnarounds. And what became really apparent to me is that there has been little transition, very little time for transition. And transition, I looked in the dictionary and just thought, transition, passage from one state or stage or subject or place to another. And or movement, development, or evolution from one form or stage or style to another. And so I teach in a university, and I'm responsible during the course of a week for being in contact with about 50 to 60 people. And the process of going from being in the body in the classroom to being online all the time has been truly amazing. And there's been no transition in it. There's been no way to talk about how we're going to be together or how we're going to support each other or even how we're going to say good morning. So when we see each other, so trying to integrate those things with content and process and all of that at the same time, again, has been filled with grief and loss, actually, around that. The other thing that I'm aware of is how much, again, I'm in a program where we spend a lot of time talking about bodies and cognition and emotion. And one of the things I'm aware of, I was in a meeting last night and we were planning a closing circle for our students who were finishing our clinical mental health program. And we spent 5 minutes in the meeting before we realized that we were talking about the meeting as though we were going to be in the room together. Because our bodies are still, and minds are still in that room. And then grief came up around that because we're not going to be in that room tonight later on when we do that. And so again, grief, which generally gets talked about as an emotional response to loss. Grief came up in that moment as we realized, oh, that's right, we're not going to be in that room. And so grief compacted. I keep reading about the word cascade comes up around grief when it's compounded. And, again, the layering around it, sometimes the difficulty, or many times the difficulty in even being able to distinguish what is being responded to. And I think that is particularly true now because there is so much layering of what's going on. The other thing about compounded grief is it also very often, and is indeed, connected to past losses. And so as death arrives, as transition arrives in the way that it does, it also stirs whatever has happened in the past around grief and loss and death. And so the process then of grieving, which I think others will talk about, and what is mourning, is also has been tremendously impacted. So for myself, in the last we went through a period of time where in 10 days we heard about 4 people who had passed who were family or friends. And that process was also, and it feels really important to say, impactful, because for me, all 4 of those folks were African American Black folk. And the process of mourning, as in a funeral, was profoundly different than it would have been by being in a social distance experience. And it all brought up how this virus is ravaging people in the Black community. And that gets talked about, or does not get talked about, or talks about gets talked about as being in a vulnerable population, and very often without much expanded beyond that. And so there's so many ways that this is impactful around grief. So a couple of other things I just want to say about grief is, again, it varies so much. The rules around it, again, are impacted by what our family systems teach us about it and what is okay and not, and what culture teaches us about it, who gets to display what, who gets to grieve for how long, and again, what are the rules, and how important it can be across culture and across context to pathologize how people grieve. And it feels really important, I think, to really be aware of how different it can be. And then within the same culture, again, there's increasingly a lot of literature and talk about how engaged in emotion a person has to be to grieve, and there needing to be room to be sure that people can grieve in different ways with regard to being directly engaged in the emotional part, whereas other people will very often come at grief through what we would call more pragmatic or cognitive means. So really, again, being aware of how different that can be. So the last couple of things I just want to say quickly is, so I'm always thinking about, so what structure do I put all of this in? And the thing that keeps coming up for me that isn't remarkable, but it's hard to remember right now, is that grief and loss impact my body, my mind, my emotions, and my spirit. And a way to keep track of how I'm doing in all of this thickness around grief and loss is to ask myself how I'm doing in each of those areas, or how are the people I'm working with doing in each of those areas? What is happening with that? One of the things I'm aware of around my mind is fuzzier at times. And I'm taking a lot more notes than I did because I'm not remembering things in the way that I did, and that's not uncommon. The other thing I'm aware of is that reminding myself to bookmark things. That time for me in the evening that is about sitting and praying and meditating and holding people in mind and being able to bookmark things to that place. And the other thing is I realized my creativity really went away for about 2 weeks, or it felt like it did. And that's something for my mind that can be really important. Remembering around my body to breathe, to notice where I'm uncomfortable as I'm sitting. And for everybody listening, if you're sitting in a chair right now, what does it feel like to put your feet on the floor? Is that more grounding? Is that soothing? What is self-soothing? Or to put our hand on our chest, or to just notice our breath for a moment. And with how fast things are moving, being able to do those things, even momentarily, can be so important. And then in terms of our emotions, what's our relationship to naming emotion and knowing emotion? And, where do tears fit? And what does gender and other aspects of culture tell us about what's okay about that and not? And what does power tell us about that? And then in relationship to spirit, there's an ongoing conversation I have with myself about God suffering with me. And what does that mean? And so where's theology? How does my theology land in all of this, really? Because I think that question has come up a lot. And I was thinking this morning about Psalm 139, which is all the things about how God knows us in the midst of what is going on here, and the being known in my inward parts and being wonderfully, fearfully and wonderfully made has come up a great deal. Last thing, in the counseling biz, I always say we talk a lot about titration and oscillation. So titration is as things come up that are, in particular, that are intense, what does it mean to slow things down and have things not come full force? And some of the things I've been talking about around self-care are about titration, a drip, as compared to a rush. Any other is oscillation, and that is, can I be aware of what is going on outside me, and also oscillate back in and be aware of what's going on for myself and oscillate back out. And what that means in terms of self-care. And then there are all kinds of things about virtual church around what does it mean as we transition back, and what is back, and who gets to come back and who will not, and what will happen for them, and what rituals of coming back together, and how will the folks who are not coming back into the building and the body still be included in that process, and what will be familiar and what will be new, what already is new and what is familiar, and the grounding and support that comes for folks by both of those being present as a boundary that people can recognize. The last thing is that I was doing some reading about transitions, and one of the questions that comes up in a book that actually is quite heteronormative, I might add, in all kinds of ways. But this question of what is my offering in terms of what am I not offering, or what am I offering, but what am I doing in a different way that is still an offering and still supports folks? And what do I know about myself around that, and really reflecting on that and seeing how that impacts contribution. So those are thoughts. I'm happy.
Wow, those are thoughts. Those are lots of big thoughts. That was like a listing of topics that we could chew on for a while. I want to encourage people to, list your questions in the question box, make your comments in the comment section. And part of what we want to happen in a way in this conversation too is for you to share some things. So I heard Carla talking about how do we do a ritual, or how are we ritualizing dealing with grief. So if you've got some things you've been doing, please share them in the comments so that you have that wisdom with each other, and we have can capture that with the chat box. I know that there was an awful lot there. I was struck even when you said something just about the body and about the sitting, and I was like, yes, because my body's been hurting differently, and I am more tired on a Sunday than I've been ever on a Sunday because I'm sitting for that virtual church as opposed to the movement where my body and spirit are moving as one. There's a lot there, even more than we were thinking about the things going on of the compounded levels of grief that are obvious on the surface. So thank you, Carla, for raising so many points here. Wow. Maxwell, Carla mentioned also about the touch and the loss of touch, and you're a chaplain in a hospital where people are used to going in and holding hands, and the whole ministry of laying hands on people as we pray with them and for them. And you're part of MCC, so we're a huggy-feely bunch. So would you like to share something with us from your perspective of being a hospital chaplain about touch?
Yeah, I suppose I mean, I echo some of what Carla was saying. We know that when big things happen in life, when somebody just ends up in hospital, then they begin to question all the sort of fundamental things that they have probably taken for granted for a very long time. And a lot of what I deal with on a daily basis is trying to kind of work with people to think about their spirituality, their spiritual care, who they are, their identity, their kind of meaning and purpose, connections to each other, a sense of the bigger picture of what's going on in the world, a connection to the divine. And I think what's happened is all of those things have suddenly come into question for some people, not for everyone. And the lockdown, we're in our 6th week of lockdown in Scotland. So the lockdown has taken a lot of that away from people. Um, Meaning and purpose is very different if you're at home than if you're not at home. Um, and connections. So this idea of being able to reach out and touch somebody. Um, and we are a touchy-feely bunch in MCC. Um, and I think lots of people are. And it is cultural, depending on where you're from. Even within Scotland, if you're from Glasgow, you'll probably hug somebody a great deal. If you're from Edinburgh, you're a wee bit more standoffish. So it is cultural, but that has kind of changed, and I think there's been a bit of a domino effect, which has meant that people's identity has really been shaken. Who are they? What they believe, how they understand their place in the world, and nothing is certain. When people have maybe assumed it has been certain, and I think the interesting thing for MCC people is a lot of us have probably experienced those things shifting when we have gone through the process of coming out, or other processes that happen when you're within a queer community. And that probably gives us some kind of greater understanding of the situation, but it still doesn't help in many ways the idea of not being able to touch, and not being able to be around people. And one of the things, in terms of being a chaplain and being in the hospital, is that um, there's a no visiting policy. I don't know if that's happened throughout hospitals elsewhere, but at the moment we have a no visiting policy. So I find myself in um, full protective clothing, holding somebody's hand, and uh, holding somebody's hand while wearing protective gloves is a very strange experience for both, I think. Um, but doing that, knowing that actually that person wishes that it was somebody else holding their hand, and having to be that in between person to kind of bridge the gap, and be willing to bridge that gap, um, can be it's a very, I think it's an experience not many of us have had it to this extent before. But it can be an absolutely wonderful spiritual experience for both people. And I think we have to think about how hard it is, but I also have to think that I have to kind of hope that we think about the positives. Um, because I kind of see people on a daily basis being dragged down by the grief and the loss. But I have also seen people being really uplifted by the generosity of human spirit and by the amount of compassion and kindness and love, that has been shared. And everything from people arriving in the hospital with, crate loads of biscuits and sweets for staff and for patients. People have turned up with literally vanfuls of toiletries for people who can't get out and get stuff. And knowing that someone in the outside world has done that makes a huge difference. And it somehow, can compensate in a small way for the idea of missing the touch of the person that you want to be touched by. We've used different things, and I think this is one of the things that no one thing fits all. So certainly in MCC terms and in ministry terms for us in Edinburgh, we've used Zoom, we've used phone calls, we've used texting. Some people have gone back to old-fashioned letter writing, as strange as that may seem for some folks. But the variety of those things has been hugely important, to kind of meet the needs. And that is about age and personality type and, what sort of technology people have. We have, we still have a significant number of people who have no access to the internet, um, who can't use that to be part of a virtual service. So we've found ways of people being able to dial in an ordinary phone call or receive letters with the details of the service so they can kind of join in. But one of the things, that I think we've tried to encourage people to do, as well as stay connected spiritually, to in a kind of faith-based way, is that we've tried to keep it as simple as possible in terms of, how people manage their days. So I think, there's a slide that might be able to go up, quite soon, hopefully. There we go. Stressful day to-do list. And this is a really straightforward slide, and there's lots of these. If you Google this, you'll find umpteen versions of it. But the idea that you eat, that you sleep, that you keep routine, that you have some exercise, that you do some form of activity, that you are in touch with other people, or you accept that other people will be in touch with you, in some way, shape, or form. And there's a whole host of little examples, on that sheet. Find a dog, that's my favourite. I'm not sure if my little dog at home wants me to find another dog, but whatever it is that makes you feel alive, and at this time. And it may be really difficult to feel alive. On the end of the first week of lockdown here, my uncle died. He passed away from COVID, day 7 of the lockdown. And I still had to get up and go to work and manage what I was dealing with and what the people there were dealing with. But there was something about keeping it simple. just getting through the day in the easiest way possible. And I think as one of the things we've worked out as caregivers is that we have to take as much care of ourselves as we do of the people that we are caring for. Whether that's spiritual direction, whether that's clinical supervision, whether that's communities of practice, all of those things hopefully can still be available for people within MCC and beyond. And I think it's important to pay attention to those things. But I also think there's something really important about not assuming that everyone is struggling and that everyone is experiencing grief. Because some people have lots of experience and inner resources that they can tap into and rely on. And we sometimes forget that, I think. I think certainly working in a hospital with lots of people where there is a lot of illness and grief and death, there are people who get better and go home. And we've had some amazing celebrations when people have gone home after weeks of being in. And that's the same with any community. Some people will be more resilient than others. And it's good to share those experiences and allow people to celebrate and not feel bad about it. Because I think my experience is some people end up feeling that they shouldn't be happy. If it's their birthday or their anniversary or a baby arrives, they kind of feel like they don't have the right to celebrate, and we can do those things with folk in some way. I think we're in it for the long haul. I don't think there's a quick fix to this. I think we will see the effects of grief and loss, as well as the celebrations, a long way down the line. But I think we can be prepared for that, because we are able to connect. We are able to do this stuff online. Thinking back to the HIV and AIDS experience that many of us would have had, I just don't think anybody could have imagined then that we could have been speaking across the globe and sharing experiences in the way that we are today. We had to wait on the newsletter alert coming from headquarters at some point to get the latest HIV information. So I think we have a lot to celebrate as much as we have to think about the difficult stuff. So I think that's me for now.
Thanks, Maxwell. That's awesome. Thank you. Lots there too. I know some people who said that they've been training their dogs how to give them good hugs. And that goes back to feeling that warmth of another body next to your body too, of people really appreciating that touch even from their animal. And lots there for us to think about. Dianne, I know that you had a particular experience with your congregation too, and that I hope you can share with us, that you had a person that was well loved, a beloved member of the congregation who passed, and you were in the situation of having to do a virtual funeral and hold that space for your whole community, even while you had your own feelings and all that too, which often happens to us. But to have to do that with all the technology and in a different reality is yet a new challenge. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience and share some?
Sure. I think that part of where I am is in the middle of it for congregations. And just like every single pastor, we're trying to hurry up and not sure where we're going. So there's pieces of this that we did really well as a congregation, having in place very quickly. And there were pieces that we couldn't have imagined. And Mary was the woman who died in our congregation. Mary was the matriarch of the church and had been for many years, she and her partner.
I knew Mary because I had done her wedding in 2004 when it became legal in Massachusetts. And so when I came here, Mary was a friendly face who I knew, and who already I had a relationship with, so it made the whole matriarch thing pretty easy, which was a delight. And so she was a woman that was involved in everything, but she had gotten sick towards in her life. She lived alone, and it was hard for her to care for herself. So she ended up in the hospital before COVID, and she was in a rehab center and doing much better. And one day I was going in every other day, and we were reading a book. I was reading a book with her about women's spirituality when you were over 55. And one day I could go in and see her, and the next I couldn't. Nobody could. Mary had very bad technology with her, a phone that barely worked. And so it became really difficult. And it was hard for all of us because, especially, there was two of us that were primary going in. And so I got a call saying that she had been moved to a single room and that they suspected that she might have COVID-19 and be infected. And so I was able to call her on the hospital phone all the time. So she and I had time every day during the process to talk. And she talked about how afraid she was, and that this was really hard for her being alone, and she was afraid of what was going to happen, and afraid of hurt. So we talked a lot about her fear and just telling her that she was loved, and that we were all holding her, praying for her. And that went on for 3 days. The last day, she seemed to have found her energy, and she perked up in the morning, and we had a really good conversation that day, and a few hours later she was dead. It just happened like that. Well, that meant all sorts of things as a pastor. That meant I had to let her family know, and her family of choice and then family, and they were in various and sundry parts of the country, and I had to let her family here, the church, know. And people were gutted, or they just were, it made it all real. They knew that we had been coming on and worshiping online. Ooh, how exciting was that? But all of a sudden it became real. And so in the midst of that, we were having to plan for, what do we do with Mary's remains? How do we take care of that? And then how do we plan this memorial service? And so we created a ritual that we could do online. And the wonderful thing about it was people that would not have been able to come to Mary's funeral if we weren't in this time were able to come to the memorial service online. Her brother, who has Parkinson's and lives too far away to travel, he was able to be present with us. And we were able to have her sister-in-law, and we were able to have friends of hers that no longer travel. So that was a gift to be able to have them there. And we had 3 people that from different times in her life were really close to her who spoke. We had songs that were recorded ahead of time so that we wouldn't have to worry about glitches, because you don't like glitches. We did a video of all the old pictures of Mary, all of the pictures. We sorted through all of her pictures, which had meant that somebody had to go to her home to get them. and how hard that was. She has 2 dogs that were there still that we had to find a way to deal with. So there was all those things. But the day of the funeral, that's what we focused on. And people came, and we had created a space that was silent. We lit the candle that brought people together. And that candle we've carried with us and start every one of our services with. We start every service with lighting a candle, and lighting a candle for those who've been lost, for those who are serving those. And we've done the same ritual piece with that candle every week. And it's helped for people to be centered. And that day that we did the memorial service, we also created breakout rooms. And that allowed people that had never met but held Mary in common could talk in small, intimate groups about the Mary they knew to each other. And that became a really powerful and healing tool for people to be able to hear the stories of when Mary was a young horseback rider in Japan, or when she was, they could share memories of her and hear about what she was doing now, or we could hear about what she was like before when she was still able to walk on her own. So that was really helpful. We've since had a number of people that have been tested positive, and we offer support how we can. And again, creating the space for the congregation to be able to work its way through this meant that we had to create a lot of different opportunities to come together in different ways. So some people like structure, so we have structured time. Some people like to chat over coffee, so we have coffee time. Some people, like to just listen. So we have things where people can listen. The thing is to try and be as creative as is possible. My father, I'm an immigrant. I'm Canadian, in case you didn't know. There was trouble with my status when my dad got critically ill and ultimately died. So I couldn't go and be with him. I couldn't go and do his funeral, which were 2 things he had asked of me. And I was unable to do it. And so I knew that feeling of this not being right and how hard it was. And I think having that experience has helped with this. So the piece that Mary always said that she loved was that I prayed with her every time we spoke. And I've done the same with other people who've been infected. I pray with them every time we speak. People who are feeling isolated or alone, we pray together. And that helps to ground them in church. It helps to ground them in something familiar. And it reminds them of the more that is God. So I think that for us, what has worked is multiple ways to work with things. Also, just a chance to take all of this and this time in the life of our congregation where everything we knew changed in a moment, and find a way through it where we didn't lose our community, where we didn't lose what we do in the world, which is such a big part of our congregation. How can we find ways to continue to be involved? And there were many ways. There were many ways that we could get food to people. There were many ways that we could help with the homelessness. There was many things we could do where we didn't have to be present, but we could contribute. We could call people and talk to them. We split our congregation up with our board, and they call people. Well, we were able to take that and expand it beyond the church. So we could still do a lot of things there. We weren't impotent, to use a word. We were able to continue to adjust things, but finding a way to do ministry in the world. So I think we've continued to talk about we've got to talk about what's going to happen and the changes we're going to have to make. Even if we do get to go back to church, it's not going to be the same. It will never look the same again. And things that are fundamental to MCC will be forever changed. I think that's
Indeed. Yeah. And I think that takes us into just, have a few moments here for questions. I read something today that talked about how quickly things changed from us stopping heavy service. We were able to make that decision of stopping to gather so quickly, but the process of when it is safe to return, or some people returning and not others returning, and can we have communion, do we not have communion, you can't hug each other, there's no passing of the peace, all those things that will change, that the process of coming back to church will be so much slower than the stopping gathering in person, and it will have all kinds of layers of compounded grief, of loss, of experience, of just feeling maybe outside of our bodies, as Carla was talking about before, that it's really different, feeling displaced. Collis asked us earlier on this piece of grief about there's some people who are in the congregation who are in denial about any form of grief they're experiencing, and yet there is so much compounded grief in the many changes in their lives. And do you have any ways we can help them process this grief? And I think Dianne was naming out some things that you've done in your congregation, helping people maybe with a named grief, but many of those would be good tools as well. Carla, or do you have something to add about maybe ways to help people process grief, both for the people that acknowledge it and people that are in denial?
So one of the things that comes up for me all the time is, what does it mean to model the behavior, and let people go at their pace? So, what gets to be spoken and not spoken by folks who are in the position to speak. And so I think that that's huge. Is there a place to speak of grief in whatever form, even sometimes not using the word, so that people are become acclimated to the idea that it could be spoken, and then remembering a lot of people really operate at a different pace, and a different way to do it. Yeah.
Maxwell, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. I think I would just echo that. I think there's something about some people just take a much longer time to deal with grief, and their ways of processing it are very different. Sometimes some of us might think those ways are not terribly helpful or could be a bit damaging to that individual, but there's something about journeying with folk. I spend a lot of my time journeying with people, and they're taking journeys that I would not choose for myself, and we have to do that with a sense of just acceptance and openness of heart, that they will make the right decisions that suit them, even if it seems very far from any good advice we might give them. We have to just go with it.
I think that we also, in this, I think that if we give people, if we think that people aren't processing it, we may be wrong. They could be journaling, they could be processing it through art that we don't know about. So part of it is that we can't assume that our way is other people's way. They might be gardening, and this might be the way that they deal with their grief. So part of it is just acknowledging that there's lots of ways to do it. You don't have to cry. You don't have to ache necessarily in the same kind of ways. Everybody can do different things.
We had another question here that was asking us about communion and how do we do communion once we get back together again. So I know that this is coming up in a number of different webinars that we've been doing. It came up in the one with the doctors last week, and you know, it's a whole question about when we do get back together and what's the status of what we know medically then, and all kinds of things. Because there's questions of if we can gather, but we're all wearing masks, it's going to be a tricky thing to even receive communion. And I know that they're talking about, you know, do you have one person that distributes it? Well, are they gloved? Are they wearing masks? How are you protecting them as well as others? Certainly the way we've served communion in MCC for many years is not how we will be serving communion the next time we get together. So lots of adjustments to be made. Who would like to comment on that? Dianne?
Oh,
It's okay.
Go ahead, whoever.
I'll do it after.
okay. I was just going to say, in Scotland, the tradition is to have everybody has a small individual glass for communion. So we did start prior to the lockdown with the person preparing that being gloved and everything being washed at very high temperatures. You can get disposable glasses, so you could throw them away. And so we have trays that the little glasses are in. So if you just pick up one, you don't need to touch the others. And in terms of the bread, again, one person, we cut the bread, so there was small pieces of bread, so everybody could just pick up one bit. And the celebrant still broke a large piece of bread, but then nobody else got a hold of that. It was just them. So certainly in our tradition it is still possible, but you have to be able to change, I suppose, to make that work.
I know that we've talked about people bringing their own bread and their own liquid beverage, and us having a ritual where we all consecrate we all consecrate. I think that that's probably the safest, and probably you could make quite a good ritual about acknowledging all the differences and how we all have a different way of bringing that bread and bringing that juice, and that we could, you know, each one of us take a turn praying over the community communion. So I think that that's probably the way that we'll do it when we go back. Just beforehand, we had ordered a bunch of those little tiny grape juice things, and we had one person drop them into a person's hand. That one person was gloved, and they would take it out, drop it into the hand, not touch the hand. The person would take it. They were responsible for disposing of it at the end. But I think that there's going to be different ways that people do it, but creating that intimacy that we had as MCC, we need to look at the kind of rituals we can create that intimacy. So having somebody come to communion and bring a poem or a song or a reading or something they've painted, or just or a prayer or whatever is important for them, is that sacred bit that we share the sacredness of all of us in those kind of rituals.
Thank you, Dianne, for that, and Maxwell. I know some of those little cups that some churches have, and you've got the host is one layer and then the grape juice is underneath. And I've noticed too, for seniors have a great, especially old or elderly, have a great deal of difficulty getting the two pieces open, or there's been a and and a wearing. And so then this sacred moment we're creating becomes this other piece of awkwardness and or isolation or exclusion. And I know for MCC we're about inclusion. So thinking about our creativity and how we could do this is really, really great. Well, folks, it's about the end of our time. It's coming up to the top of the hour, I believe. So I just want to encourage the participants that are here to, if you've got any other questions, if you type them down now, we'd be happy to share them with our panelists and have some responses go back to you if we didn't get to that. I want to thank you for participating and being here. I think you've heard some richness today of things to be just aware of and be thinking about. So let me say our thanks to Reverend Elder Dianne Fischer for sharing your story. Thank you. And Maxwell for sharing your experience. And I know we've had some people asking if we were going to do a webinar just to feature even some stories of people who were in the hospitals. So thank you for bringing that particular experience to this table. And thank you, Dr. Carla Sherrill, for coming and giving this that exhaustive list of things to think about and all the many layers. So thank you so much. I see some things coming in now. And tell us about the next webinar. Yes. So there's a couple of things that are coming. There's going to be notice going out very soon about thinking theologically. That will be happening next Monday. So you're getting the advanced notice. Nothing's been in print about it yet. But thinking theologically, we want to talk about some of the theological issues that have been coming up for us in the midst of not being able to gather in person and about thinking about coming back to church. There are all kinds of theological issues there that we want to just wrestle with and have a conversation. That one will not have panelists per se. It will be a conversation and in a Zoom room. And then we just started working on one to deal with legal issues and liabilities. So look for that coming down the road. So we're working to get some other resources to you and hope that it helps you. If you've got something you need and want help on from MCC, please ask us. Be in touch with your staff. Let us know what the needs are so we can do our best to meet that need. I want to thank you once again, panelists, for being here. Thanks, Mike, for in the back of the house helping run all the tech here for us. And thank you all. Let's keep caring for one another, ourselves as well. Take care of our body and soul as well as caring for others. God bless and good night.